I didn't find out the truth from my husband. I found out from a stranger standing at my front door. She looked at me like she already hated me. Then she looked past me, at the boy behind my legs. And she said 5 words that shattered my entire life. "That child is mine." I laughed at first. I thought she was crazy. I thought this was some kind of sick joke. But my husband went pale. That's when I knew. For 12 years, I had raised a child who wasn't biologically mine. 12 years of sleepless nights. School lunches. Homework. Hospital visits. Tears. Laughter. Love. And now a woman I had never met was telling me she gave birth to him. My husband finally spoke. "She left," he said quietly. "She didn't want him. So I gave him to you." Just like that. He let me believe I was a mother, when I was just a replacement. But here's the part they didn't expect. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I smiled. Because if they thought taking him back would break me, they had no idea who they were dealing with. This isn't just a story about lies. It's about motherhood, about betrayal, and about what happens when a woman realizes the child she raised is hers in every way that actually matters. Don't skip, because what I did next changed all of their lives forever. I met Daniel when I was 26. He was kind in a quiet way. Not charming, not flashy, just steady. The kind of man who listened more than he spoke. When he told me he had a 2-year-old son, I didn't hesitate. I remember asking, "Where's his mother?" Daniel looked down and said, "She left. She didn't want to be a mother." That was all. No bitterness. No anger. Just a fact. I believed him. I met the little boy a week later. His name was Ethan. Big eyes. Chubby cheeks. He hid behind Daniel's leg and stared at me like he was trying to decide whether I was safe. I knelt down and said, "Hi, I'm Anna." He didn't smile, but he reached out and grabbed my finger. That was it. I was done. From that moment on, he was mine. Not biologically, but in every way that mattered. I became his mother without anyone ever asking me if I wanted to be. And I wanted to be. I learned how he liked his eggs. I learned which songs calmed him when he cried at night. I learned how to read his moods just by the way he walked into a room. Daniel and I married when Ethan was 4. At the wedding, Ethan stood between us in a tiny suit, holding both our hands. When the officiant said, "Do you take this woman to be your wife?" Ethan squeezed my hand tighter than Daniel did. I told myself that was fate. There were moments, small ones, when things didn't quite add up. Ethan didn't look like Daniel. Different eyes. Different hair. People would comment on it. "He must take after his mom," they'd say. Daniel would always change the subject. I didn't push. Why would I? Families don't always look alike. I never met Ethan's biological mother. No photos. No name. No stories. Daniel said she wanted a clean break. No contact. No reminders. I respected that. I thought I was being mature. Understanding. Kind. What I didn't realize was that I was being kept in the dark on purpose. When Ethan was 7, he had to do a family tree project for school. He came home confused. "Mom," he asked, "why doesn't Dad talk about my other mom?" I froze. I knelt down in front of him and said carefully, "Sometimes adults leave because they're not ready to be parents. But that doesn't mean they didn't love you." That was the lie I told to protect him. Daniel heard the conversation from the kitchen. That night, he held me a little too tightly in bed. "Thank you," he whispered, "for never questioning it." I thought he meant trusting him. Now I know he meant something else. 12 years passed like that. 12 years of birthdays. 12 years of scraped knees. 12 years of "Mom, watch this." 12 years of loving a child as if my heart had grown outside my body. I never adopted Ethan legally. Daniel always said, "We'll do the paperwork later. It's just a formality." I didn't push. I already felt like his mother. Why would I need a document? That was my second mistake. The day everything fell apart started like any other Tuesday. I was making dinner when the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, a woman stood there. Early 40s. Well-dressed. Eyes sharp and assessing. She didn't smile. She didn't introduce herself. She looked straight past me, into my house, into my life. And then she said the words that shattered everything I thought I knew. "I'm here for my son." Behind me, Ethan stepped into the hallway. She looked at him, and I watched something pass between them that made my stomach drop. Recognition. Not love. Not warmth. Ownership. And in that moment, before Daniel even came into the room, before anyone explained anything, I knew. My life hadn't just been built on love. It had been built on a lie. Daniel froze the moment he saw her. That was the first thing I noticed. Not anger. Not surprise. Fear. Who is this? I asked, even though every cell in my body already knew the answer. The woman crossed her arms slowly, like she had all the time in the world. You didn't tell her? She asked Daniel, her voice calm, almost amused. Wow. You really let this go on, didn't you? Daniel finally found his voice. Laura, this isn't the time. Laura. So she had a name. She stepped forward, ignoring him, her eyes never leaving Ethan. You've grown, she said. Taller than I expected. Ethan looked up at me, confused. Mom. That word, Mom, hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Laura's lips tightened. He calls you that. I felt something sharp twist in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. Yes, he does. Daniel cleared his throat. Ethan, why don't you go to your room for a bit? Ethan hesitated. But, I'll come get you when we're done, I said quickly, forcing a smile. Go on. He nodded slowly and disappeared down the hallway. The moment his door closed, Laura's entire demeanor changed. She turned to Daniel. I'm not here to chat. I want him back. Just like that. No hesitation. No emotion. I stared at her. You don't get to walk in after 12 years and say that. She finally looked at me directly. Her eyes were cold, assessing. Actually, I do. I'm his biological mother. And I never signed away my rights. I turned to Daniel. Is that true? He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. Laura sat down at my kitchen table like she owned the place. I was young, she said casually. I didn't want a child back then. Daniel begged me not to terminate the pregnancy. Promised he'd take care of everything. My stomach churned. So you just left? I asked. She shrugged. I had a career. A life. I wasn't ready to be tied down. And now you are? I snapped. She smiled thinly. Now he's 12. The hard part is done. Daniel flinched. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. You don't get to call raising him the hard part when you weren't here for any of it. Laura tilted her head. You raised him. Not me. Her words were precise. Surgical. And now I want him back, she continued. I've spoken to a lawyer. Daniel knows. I turned slowly to my husband. You knew she was coming. He rubbed his face. She contacted me months ago. Months. My voice cracked. You let me keep living like everything was normal? I didn't know what to do, he said weakly. I thought maybe she'd change her mind. Laura laughed softly. Oh, Daniel. You always were a terrible liar. That night after Laura left, I sat alone in Ethan's room. I watched him sleep. The same child I'd rocked through fevers. The same child who called for me when he had nightmares. The same child who had whispered, I love you, Mom, just that morning. And suddenly I was being told he might be taken away. Not because I was unfit. Not because I didn't love him. But because of biology. The next day, Daniel finally told me the truth. The whole truth. Laura hadn't left forever. She and Daniel had made an agreement. She would stay away. No contact. No involvement. In exchange, Daniel paid her. Monthly. Quietly. For years. So you bought her silence, I said. He nodded. And you never thought to tell me? You loved him, he said. I didn't want to complicate things. I laughed then. A short, broken sound. You didn't want to complicate your life. So you used mine. The lawyer's letter arrived a week later. Laura was filing for custody. She cited parental alienation. Claimed I had replaced her. Argued that Ethan deserved to be with his real mother. I felt physically sick reading it. Daniel tried to comfort me. The court will see reason. I looked at him and realized something terrifying. He didn't understand what was at stake. This wasn't about winning or losing. This was about my child. And I would not let him be taken by a woman who had walked away once already. Not without a fight. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I started digging. Bank records. Old emails. Phone logs. And that's when I found it. An email thread between Daniel and Laura from 12 years ago. Her words stared back at me from the screen. I don't want him. But if you want him, you'll make it worth my while. And Daniel's reply. I'll handle it. She doesn't need to know. She. Me. That was the moment something inside me hardened. They thought this was a transaction. They thought I was just a placeholder. They were wrong. Because I wasn't just a woman who helped raise a child. I was his mother. And mothers don't walk away quietly. The custody papers arrived on a Thursday morning. I remember the exact moment because my hands were shaking so badly I spilled coffee across the counter. Laura wasn't asking for shared custody. She wasn't asking for visitation. She was asking for full custody, with me listed as an obstructive third party. That's when I understood something very clearly. This wasn't about Ethan's well-being. This was about control. Daniel tried to calm me down. Courts favor biological parents, he said gently, like he was explaining bad weather. But it doesn't mean she'll win. I turned to him slowly. You paid her to disappear, I said. You lied to me for 12 years. And now you expect me to trust that you'll protect us. He didn't answer. That silence told me something else. I was on my own. I hired a lawyer the same day. Her name was Margaret Hale, and she didn't smile when I told her the story. She listened, took notes, asked sharp questions. Then she said something that made my heart stop. If Laura never legally gave up her parental rights, she said, this is going to be ugly. I swallowed. What are my chances? Margaret looked at me carefully. That depends on what we can prove. Prove what? That Laura abandoned her child. And that you didn't just help raise him, you were his primary parent. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. We started building the case. School records listing me as the emergency contact. Medical forms with my signature. Teachers' emails addressed to Mom. Photos. Videos. Birthday cards written in Ethan's handwriting. Love you, Mom. You're the best, Mom. Thank you for everything. But Laura had a strategy too. She painted herself as a woman who had been forced to give up her child. She claimed Daniel manipulated her. That I erased her presence. The nerve of it made my blood boil. Then came the moment that changed everything. Laura requested a private interview with Ethan. I objected immediately. He's 12, I argued. He's confused and scared. You can't just interrogate him. The judge allowed it anyway. I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom while it happened, staring at the floor like it might collapse beneath me. When Ethan came out, his face was pale. Did she say something to you? I asked softly. He hesitated, then nodded. She said, you're not my real mom, he whispered. Something inside me broke. But you are, he added quickly. You're the one who stayed. I pulled him into my arms and held him tighter than I ever had. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed Laura's words. Her confidence. Her calm. She believed biology would win. So I decided to change the game. Margaret warned me. What you're thinking, it's risky. I know, I said. But it's necessary. I filed a petition the next morning. To adopt Ethan. Legally. Permanently. Daniel exploded. You're trying to take my son from me? He shouted. No, I said calmly. I'm trying to protect him. Something you failed to do. Laura laughed when she heard. She doesn't stand a chance, she told her lawyer. Adoption takes consent. She was right. Normally. But she forgot one thing. Consent can be overridden in cases of abandonment and financial coercion. And we had proof of both. Margaret uncovered the payments. Every transfer. Every memo. Every quiet transaction Laura thought no one would notice. Support. Agreement. As discussed. We subpoenaed her records. And suddenly, the woman who claimed she had been forced to give up her child had to explain why she accepted money for 12 years. The judge wasn't smiling anymore. Laura's lawyer requested a recess. I watched Laura for the first time without fear. Her confidence was cracking. Because for the first time, she was being seen clearly. Not as a mother who returned, but as a woman who sold her absence. When court adjourned that day, Margaret leaned toward me and whispered. She didn't expect this. I nodded slowly. She still hasn't. Because this was only my first move. And I had 12 years of love on my side. Laura didn't look at me when we walked back into the courtroom. That alone told me everything. The confident woman who had walked into my house weeks ago, claiming ownership like she was reclaiming lost property, was gone. In her place sat someone tense, calculating, afraid of making the wrong move. Because now the story was no longer hers to control. The judge requested additional testimony. That's when Daniel was called to the stand. I felt my chest tighten. For 12 years, he had been the center of this lie. The bridge between Laura's absence and my motherhood. And now he had to choose, finally, whether to protect himself or tell the truth. Margaret leaned toward me. Whatever happens, she whispered, do not react. Daniel swore in and sat down. His hands were shaking. Laura's lawyer went first. Mr. Carter, he said smoothly, can you explain why the biological mother was not present in the child's life? Daniel hesitated, then said, she didn't want to be involved at the time. And you respected her decision? Daniel nodded. Did my client ever say she wanted to permanently abandon her child? No, Daniel answered. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. But Margaret didn't move. She waited. Then it was our turn. Mr. Carter, Margaret said calmly. How old was Ethan when Ms. Laura left? 2, Daniel said. And after she left, who provided daily care for the child? Anna did. Who took him to school? Anna. Who attended parent-teacher meetings? Anna. Who was listed as his mother on school and medical records? Daniel swallowed. Anna. Margaret nodded, then leaned forward. Did you ever tell your wife that Ms. Laura was receiving monthly payments from you? Daniel's head snapped up. No. Why not? Because, he said quietly, she wouldn't have stayed. The courtroom went silent. Laura's head turned sharply toward him. Margaret didn't stop. Mr. Carter, did Ms. Laura ever attempt to contact Ethan during those 12 years? No. Did she send gifts? Cards? Letters? No. Did she attend birthdays? Holidays? School events? No. And yet, Margaret said, holding up a document, she accepted monthly payments labeled agreement for over a decade. Can you explain that? Daniel closed his eyes. It was to keep things peaceful. To keep her away? Margaret pressed. Yes. Laura stood up. This is a lie, she snapped. He manipulated me. He made it impossible for me to come back. The judge raised a hand sharply. Sit down, Ms. Laura. For the first time, her voice was shaking. Then Margaret did something Laura never expected. She called Ethan's therapist to the stand. A neutral professional. Court approved. Unbiased. The therapist spoke gently. In our sessions, Ethan consistently identifies Anna as his primary attachment figure. She is his source of emotional safety. Laura's lawyer objected. The judge overruled. Then came the final blow. Margaret handed the judge a printed email. Laura's email. Written 12 years ago. I don't want him. But if you insist on keeping him, I expect compensation. This is not charity. The judge read it slowly. Twice. Then looked up at Laura. Ms. Laura, he said, do you recognize this email? Laura's mouth opened. Closed. Yes, she whispered. That was the moment her power shattered. Not because she lost biologically, but because the court finally saw her truth. She didn't lose a child. She walked away. And now she wanted him back because he was convenient. Daniel stepped down from the stand a broken man. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. Because in telling the truth, he had finally admitted what he'd done to me. To Ethan. To all of us. The judge called for a recess. As people stood, Laura finally looked at me. Her eyes weren't angry anymore. They were desperate. This isn't over, she whispered. I met her gaze calmly. You're right, I said. It isn't. Because now the court knew who she really was. And the final decision was coming. The courtroom was silent when the judge returned. Not the quiet kind. The kind that presses against your chest until it's hard to breathe. Ethan sat beside me, his hand gripping mine so tightly my fingers went numb. He hadn't said much since the testimony. He didn't need to. His body said everything, fear, confusion, hope all tangled together. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at the files one last time. Custody cases are rarely simple, he began. But this one is not about biology alone. It is about consistency, stability, and truth. Laura sat up straighter. Daniel stared at the floor. I didn't move. Ms. Laura, the judge continued, you voluntarily removed yourself from this child's life for 12 years. You accepted financial compensation in exchange for that absence. That is not temporary hardship. That is abandonment. Laura's lawyer started to speak, but the judge raised a hand. No. Laura's face drained of color. The judge turned to me. Ms. Anna, you have been this child's psychological mother in every meaningful way. You provided daily care, emotional support, and stability. The court recognizes that. I felt tears burn behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet. Then came the words I will never forget. The court denies the petition for full custody by the biological mother. Laura gasped. Ethan's grip tightened. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, he said, the court grants Ms. Anna temporary sole custodial authority, pending finalization of legal adoption proceedings. For a moment, the world stopped. Then Ethan turned to me, eyes wide. Mom, does that mean I stay? I pulled him into my arms, my voice breaking for the first time. Yes, I whispered. You're home. Laura stood up abruptly. This is unfair, she said, her voice sharp with panic. I'm his real mother. The judge looked at her calmly. No, he said. You are his biological parent. There is a difference. That sentence ended everything. Outside the courthouse, Daniel finally spoke. I never meant for this to happen, he said quietly. I thought I was doing the right thing. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing but exhaustion. You made choices, I said. And you let me live with the consequences. He nodded. I'll sign whatever papers you need. I didn't thank him. This wasn't a favor. It was accountability. Laura didn't say a word as she walked past us. She didn't look at Ethan. She didn't look at me. She had already lost him long before she ever knocked on my door. That night, Ethan asked me a question I'd been dreading. Do you think she ever loved me? I took a deep breath. I think she loved the idea of you, I said honestly. But love is what you do, not what you say. He nodded slowly. Then he smiled, small but certain. I'm glad you're my mom. That was it. That was everything. I didn't win because I fought harder. I won because I stayed. Because I showed up every day for 12 years when it mattered. And that's the truth no court can ignore. Life didn't magically become perfect after the court ruling. But it became honest. For the first time in 12 years, there were no secrets hiding under the surface. No shadows waiting to return. No fear that a knock on the door could take my child away. Ethan and I went home that evening in silence. Not the heavy kind, but the peaceful kind. The kind that settles after a storm finally passes. That night, he sat on the edge of my bed like he used to when he was little. Are things going to be weird now? He asked. Different, I said carefully. But different doesn't mean bad. He thought about that for a moment. Do I have to stop calling you Mom? My heart stopped. I knelt in front of him and took his hands. That's your choice. Always has been. He didn't hesitate. You're my mom, he said simply. You always were. And just like that, 12 years of fear dissolved into one quiet truth. Daniel moved out a month later. Not because I screamed. Not because I demanded it. But because trust, once broken at that level, doesn't come back. We co-parent respectfully. He shows up for Ethan. He signs the adoption papers without argument. He accepts the consequences of his choices. That's all I needed from him. Laura disappeared from our lives completely. No calls. No letters. No appeals. The court ordered supervised visitation if she ever chose to pursue it again. She never did. Because once control was gone, so was her interest. The adoption was finalized 6 months later. In a small courtroom, with no drama, no speeches, no audience. Just a judge, a pen, and a boy who squeezed my hand when the papers were signed. On the drive home, Ethan looked out the window and said something I'll never forget. You know, even if they hadn't let you adopt me, I still would have picked you. That's when I understood something deeply. Motherhood isn't granted by blood. It's earned by presence. By staying. By choosing a child every single day. Especially when it's hard. People sometimes ask me if I regret staying with Daniel when Ethan was so young. If I regret not asking more questions. If I regret believing a lie for so long. I don't. Because even if the truth was painful, it led me to him. And I would live that lie again 1,000 times if it meant loving my son for even one day. Ethan is 13 now. He's taller. Louder. Sarcastic in that way only teenagers can be. But every night before bed he still says the same thing. Good night, Mom. And every time, I answer the same way. Good night, my love. Laura may have given birth to him. But I raised him. And in the end, that was the only truth that mattered.